How's it going there, everybody? This is Kyle with Dirt Bike Channel. On this day, you've got the Honda CR250R, the 2003 project bike on the left, and you've got Sam's 2018 KTM 250XE. This is my old bike. We first did a ride out and back on the Honda, and then I came back through and said, hey, let's come and do a side-by-side comparison. So right now I've stopped the video right here. We're in the same spot, and I've done the run once on the Honda out and back, and then we come and I'm going to do it again on the Honda out and back, and then we'll swap over and I'll try it on the KTM, and Sam will do the same thing. So Sam is behind me. What you're seeing is the split screen of me doing it on, both bikes. And already I can tell you that I'm about 2 seconds behind on the Honda, even though I've already done this section of trail multiple times in the past, and even at least once today. And the problem I was having is I was having a hard time getting the Honda to turn. I was having a hard time. It just kind of wanted to go in a straight line. Versus the KTM, it was just where I look is where it would go. So I was fighting more with the Honda. Now, honestly, as all of you guys know who ride, the more you use a platform and the more you ride a platform, the better off you're going to be on that platform. As you can see, I set the sag the same on both bikes. I've got a little sticker down here saying that. So I'd set the bikes up as closely as I could, and I had adjusted the clickers as much, and I had taken some compression out of the front fork on the Honda, because we'd had it out on a motocross track where Tyler was riding it, and so I was kind of trying to soften up the fork and everything, and give the bike a softer feel, even though it still has basically the motocross valving. We wanted to kind of leave the bike stock. We redid everything on it. If you watched any of those videos, the bike is essentially new, but I just struggle on it. I struggle on this bike in this terrain because it is so much different. It being, a 15, 16-year-old bike now, it gets a little bit long in the tooth. And when you're doing some of this tighter stuff, like you see here, some of this more technical stuff, it's really apparent. The other thing that was hard for me to do on the Honda, it was hard for me to keep the front wheel light, because it feels like most of the weight is on the Honda is on that front wheel. It's like it's got a 10-pound weight or a 50-pound weight up there. You can see now this run was 2 minutes, almost 2 minutes flat on the KTM, and it's going to be 6.4 seconds slower for me on the Honda. Now, if you get somebody who's super used to Hondas or whatever, this test could be backwards. When I go back, though, you'll see I give myself a head start on the Honda. I started back a little bit further. I didn't even realize that. So on the KTM, I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage because I don't start out with the same amount of speed, but over through this more technical, slower section, I will end up getting all of that back on the KTM and then some, and then again I'll finish ahead on the KTM. And after this run through, I'll just kind of I'll show you some of my thoughts right after it was over. And I was pretty emotionally charged at that point, because I felt like, this is one of my first days back, getting back into bikes, and I was really glad that I didn't start out my first day back on the Honda, because I really felt like a fish out of water on the thing. I didn't ride it terribly, but I just wasn't comfortable on it. I wasn't comfortable with the brakes. I wasn't comfortable with the handlebars. I wasn't comfortable with the way the power's delivered. It's so hard to get traction on this bike, and it even had better tires. The Honda had some Shinko tires that do really, really well out here, versus the KTM had some worn-out Dunlop AT81 tires. So the tires advantage much goes to the Honda, whereas on the KTM, I just felt so much more comfortable. And I get it. I've been riding KTMs a lot, but I've also been riding a lot of other bikes, Yamahas and Suzukis and Kawasaki's and Betas and Shurkos and all of these other bikes. And of all the bikes that I've been riding in the last several years, I probably felt more out of place on the Honda than any of those other bikes. That isn't saying that the Honda sucks or that it's bad or anything. It's just saying that it was a lot different for me. Whether that's because it's so much older, or whether that's just because it's the Honda platform with a much different frame and a much different balance point and all of those things, I don't know. We'll do more testing on the Honda, and we're going to do some different things to make it a little bit better in single track, maybe soften up the valving a little bit more, add a flywheel weight, maybe even put on so here you see I'm 202 on the KTM, and then I am exactly 4.5 seconds slower on the Honda. So there's a few things we can do to the Honda to kind of give it a little bit more advantages out here in this kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's a 15-year-old bike. Let's hear more what me and Sam had to say right after this ride, right now.
But for stock, this is more open terrain, and it, in this terrain, I feel like it acts like a 15-year-old bike.
Wow, I couldn't agree more. I felt like a fish out of water on the Honda. I felt like I didn't even know how to ride, because this was the most, not that was technical, but it was a lot of turns. There was some technical stuff with the rocks you had to deal with, and then tight turns, and then trees that were there to break your hands around half the turns with branches coming out. And I felt like I almost crashed a couple times. I felt like I didn't even know how to ride the bike. I felt so discouraged, because I was like, have I lost that much after 6 months of off the bike? I was really ready. I was going to be put on suicide watch just a few minutes ago. I didn't tell Sam that. Then I jumped on the bike, which was my old bike that I haven't ridden personally for 6 months, and I felt like a superhero. I felt like it was a video game. The bike it was so light and so nimble and so quick to turn. The power was so much more linear on the KTM. It had power all throughout the RPM range, which the Honda lacks. The Honda has gobs of power as soon as you get onto the pipe, but there's no power if you're not on the pipe. On the KTM, that power band is much more linear, and this is the KTM even has the red spring in it, so it should be like, more fire-breathing dragon. You can tune that down and make it even more linear with like the yellow spring, which the bikes come stock with. So anyway, the brakes were amazing. The bike felt so much more balanced. I was able to, anywhere I looked, the bike went. I was able to steer with the rear wheel. The front wheel was so light. I could plant the front wheel anywhere I wanted and keep it light and float over things, whereas with the Honda, I was plowing through things. It was night and day. I felt like a piece of crap on the Honda. I'm just telling it like it is. And I felt like a demigod on the KTM. And you're going to say you're just a KTM fanboy. You're going to say you're familiar with the platform. I am familiar with the platform. But that bike I'm not familiar with. I haven't ridden that bike for 6 months, gentlemen. 6 months. Okay? And it was amazing. Now, if we rode that bike more and more and more, we'd become better and better with it. Any platform, anything that you persist in doing, consistently use, you're going to get better at. So I'm not saying that the Honda is crap. I'm just saying I can't ride it worth crap. And you definitely feel the age. If you tweak your suspension and you do some things and you put more and more time on the bike, you'd be able to get more and more comfortable with it. But I'm just telling you, you can tell that bike is long in the tooth when you start trying to turn it through these tight trees and get through some of these sections. You can tell that the suspension is a 15-year-old suspension, even though it's got new oil, new seals, everything throughout the suspension. It just doesn't turn as fast. It doesn't turn as quickly, and it doesn't absorb the chop as much. Now, we can play with the clickers a little bit and see if we can get some of that back, because after riding the KTM, I think we need to take some of the compression out, a few clicks of compression out of the Honda on the forks. I'm going to do that right now, but I'm going to have to arm wrestle Sam if he'll let me ride his bike a little bit more the rest of the day, because I thoroughly enjoyed that.
But I had fun on the Honda, but I just went way slower. I just be honest, and for whatever reason, for me and standing up on the bike, I feel kind of like Kyle said, a fish out of the water. But sitting down, it just feels like my old Hondas, right?
The other thing I noticed immediately is the shifter on the Honda is closer to the foot peg.
I noticed that, yep.
It's about an inch closer to the foot peg, and so it's harder for me to get my foot under it to shift. It's easy to shift down, but it's harder for me to get my foot under there to shift it up, to get up into a gear. Whereas the KTM, it's spaced out a little bit further, so it's much easier for me to get my foot on there. Another thing that happened is one of the times I felt like I was on top. I was trying to get the rear brake, and I don't know if I hit the skid plate or if I hit the top of the clutch case or something, or one of those water pump bolts, but I couldn't get my foot down onto the brake. That's just probably getting used to it. But anyway, that was severely eye-opening to me on which bike I like better to ride. And mostly it comes down to the balance of the KTM and the way that the power is delivered. So much more linear.